"This identification's been expired for decades," the guard said flatly, holding the old military card between two fingers like it was something fragile or fake. He chuckled under his breath as he turned it toward the sunlight, exposing its age like a punchline. Across from him, the elderly man didn't flinch. He stood quietly, shoulders squared, eyes steady behind thin-framed glasses. A younger officer nearby chimed in, leaning lazily against the checkpoint booth. His voice was calm, but coated in sarcasm. "You really trying to get through here with that?" he said. "You better be the real deal, sir." Neither man expected an answer. But 3 minutes later, the desk phone inside the booth rang, hard and sudden. One ring, one answer, one sentence. "You just denied access to the former commander of Bravo Team Special Forces." And everything shifted. Walter Kane moved with a kind of patience only time and battle could teach. He was close to 80, thin-framed but steady on his feet, dressed with care in desert-worn clothes, pressed slacks, a navy button-up, a brown jacket that had clearly seen years of weather and history. His skin, deep and lined, held the memory of sun and sweat in command. His hair, short and gray, was shaped with the precision of someone who still respected discipline, even in retirement. This was Veterans Day, a cloudless, dry Nevada morning. And after 4 decades of living 30 miles from Camp Brighton, Walter had finally decided to visit. The base was holding its annual tribute that day. Flags had been raised. Ceremonial rifles had been prepped. A brass band was warming up near the training field. Walter didn't come for the speeches, or the music, or the free coffee in the mess hall. He came with 2 things: a folded ID that had seen better decades, and a thick government-sealed envelope tucked under his arm. He approached the gates slowly, not because he was weak, but because haste, to him, was undignified. "Morning," he said to the guard. His voice was low, calm, respectful. "I'd like to visit the memorial today." The guard, Lieutenant Kevin Brooks, was barely 26, and looked like someone who hadn't yet grown into his own rank. He took the card, frowned, then squinted at the faded ink. "This thing's been expired since 1994, he said, turning it around like a novelty item. Sergeant Daniel Ortiz strolled over next, broad-shouldered, loud-voiced, and already laughing before he'd even heard the whole story. "Let me guess," Ortiz called out, grinning. "Another old man with a dusty ID and a tail to go with it." Walter didn't argue, didn't even react. Brooks raised the card higher so others could see. A few nearby soldiers started drifting closer. Some smirked. Others stayed silent. "If you want access to a military base," Brooks added, "you need real documents, not memories." Still silent, Walter extended his hand and took the ID back gently, then without a word returned it to his jacket along with the envelope. He gave a polite nod, turned, and began walking away. The crowd behind him slowly dispersed. The snickering faded, but Walter's pace never changed. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't look back, and he didn't need a crowd to know who he was. He wasn't there to prove anything, because men like him didn't need permission to carry history. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. Walter simply accepted the gate officer's word and turned back, his steps deliberate but steady as he walked toward the public lot. Behind him, the checkpoint returned to routine. No one called after him. No one second-guessed what they'd done, except one. Private Jason Rivera had stood quietly through the entire exchange, unnoticed. Unlike the others, he wasn't laughing. He couldn't. Something about the old man's quiet strength had unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. The way he didn't plead or protest, just stood there, like he'd been through worse and still didn't flinch. Jason had seen plenty of people try to talk their way past security, some with real rank, others just playing soldier. They all made noise. They always had something to prove. But this man, this Walter Kane, was different. There was something deeper in his stillness. Jason wasn't a seasoned soldier. He'd only been out of basic 6 months. His uniform still felt new. But his father had worn fatigues for over 2 decades, and Jason had grown up hearing stories about quiet giants. Men from a different generation. Men who didn't bark orders to get respect. They earned it by how they stood, by how they listened, by how they never needed to raise their voice. And watching Kane had stirred something in him. Jason waited until the others had gone back to their posts, then slipped into the admin room behind the gate. He pulled out his phone and scrolled down to a saved contact. Uncle Bob. Bob Taylor wasn't just family. He worked in personnel, deep enough in the Pentagon to run a name through the right system. Jason tapped the number. "Hey, Uncle Bob, it's me. Yeah, I'm good. A pause. Then, listen. An older guy came by the gate just now. He had a military ID. Looked ancient. Most of the crew here laughed it off, but I don't know. Something about him felt real. Like, really real. Name was Walter Kane. Think you could check if that name's in the system? Maybe from the 70s or earlier? Bob promised to call back. Jason hung up and looked out the small side window. Walter hadn't gone far. He was sitting on a bench just outside the gate, hands folded, head lowered slightly. Not out of defeat, just waiting. The way someone might wait for a storm to pass, or an answer that needed no explanation. Jason stared for a long time, then murmured a phrase he hadn't thought of in years, one his father used to drill into him. When everyone looks away, the conscience stays standing. He said it again, softer, and this time, it stuck. Elsewhere on base, word of the gate incident was already making rounds. At the cafeteria, the early morning crowd buzzed with talk as soldiers grabbed coffee and breakfast. Behind the counter, Annie Delgado overheard two guards swapping jokes. He looked like he'd blow over in the wind, one said. Had this crusty ID from like, I don't know, the 90s? What was he wearing? Annie asked casually, wiping her hands on her apron. Brown coat. Real quiet. Didn't argue. Just turned and walked. Annie went still. I saw that man once, she said slowly. Back in '89. Fire broke out in the armory. 3 guys were trapped. Smoke everywhere. He went in. No gear, no hesitation. Pulled all 3 out. The guards looked at each other, uncertain. I never got his name, Annie continued. But that face? I never forgot. One guard raised a skeptical brow. If that's true, that man's a legend. Annie gave a sad smile. Legends don't always wear medals. And sometimes, they get turned away. Word of what happened at the gate didn't stay small for long. By mid-morning, it had begun to ripple quietly across Camp Brighton. In the communications office, a young officer who had overheard Annie's story couldn't shake the image of the man sitting silently outside. Acting on instinct, he snapped a grainy photo through the window. Walter Kane, seated alone on the bench, his back straight, his eyes forward. The photo was posted anonymously to the base's internal message board under a headline that read, "Does anyone know this veteran?" Turned away at the gate. Mess hall says he saved lives during the '89 Armory fire responses came fast. One soldier wrote, "That's the guy in that black and white photo in Colonel Grant's office. The rescue shot." Another chimed in, "Pretty sure my dad mentioned him. Said he was something serious back in the day. Thought he passed away though." A third added, "Wasn't that the name connected to that classified op in Vietnam? Kane? Something about Cambodia?" Inside the checkpoint building, Private Jason Rivera sat by the phone, hands clenched, heartbeat steady but fast. He'd placed the call to his uncle 20 minutes earlier. Now he waited. Then, ring. He snapped it up. "Private Rivera." The voice on the other end was clipped, commanding. "This is Colonel Samuel Hayes, Department of Historical Special Operations." Jason straightened in his chair. "I need to speak with your ranking officer. Immediately. Put me on speaker." Jason waved urgently to Lieutenant Brooks. "Sir, Pentagon call. They need you now." Brooks looked confused but stepped over and picked up. "This is Lieutenant Brooks." Colonel Hayes didn't wait. "Lieutenant, your team just denied access to a decorated Special Operations veteran. Put this on speaker. Now." Brooks complied. The room went still as Hayes's voice filled the space. "You turned away retired Colonel Walter Elias Kane," Hayes said. "Former commander of Bravo Team Special Forces. Served from 1971 to 1999. His clearance remains active under General Order 117-A. ID expiration is irrelevant." Sergeant Ortiz, lounging against the wall moments earlier, now stood at full attention. Brooks's mouth opened, then closed again. "Sir, we—" "Do not explain," Hayes cut in. "Colonel Kane is authorized to attend today's memorial. He led the most successful POW extraction mission in the Vietnam conflict, and in 1975, he personally directed the Cambodia rescue. 28 American prisoners retrieved. 0 casualties. Every person in the room froze. The Cambodia op was legendary, shrouded in silence, whispered in training rooms, but never confirmed. Until now." Colonel Hayes continued, "A vehicle is en route. Until it arrives, I expect that man to be treated with absolute respect." Right on cue, the sound of tires crunching gravel turned heads. A black military SUV stopped just short of the checkpoint. 3 officers stepped out. One wore full-dress blues, a wall of ribbons across his chest. He marched straight to the post. "Colonel Beckett, United States Army. Where is Colonel Kane?" Brooks, pale now, silently pointed toward the bench outside. Without pause, Beckett turned and walked straight toward Walter. Jason watched from the window as Beckett stopped in front of the old man, snapped a sharp salute. Walter rose with intention. He moved slowly, but there was grace in the motion, a command still present beneath the years. He returned the salute. They spoke briefly. Beckett took the envelope Walter handed him like it was gold. The two shook hands firmly. 15 minutes later, the gate opened once again, not for a guest, but for a legend returning on his own terms. Lieutenant Brooks and Sergeant Ortiz no longer wore smirks. Now, they stood at rigid attention, as Colonel Beckett led Kane and his escorts past the checkpoint without hesitation. "These men are authorized under my command," Beckett said. His tone left no space for questions. As the group crossed the threshold, Beckett paused and glanced back at the gathered security staff. "One more thing," he said coldly. "The ID you mocked isn't just a card. It contains a tracking chip. Activated once a year, on this day. We monitor it. On purpose." Brooks stiffened. I didn't realize," he said, voice cracking under the weight of his mistake. "No," Beckett replied. "You didn't. What you saw was an aging veteran with a worn-out pass. What you missed was a man whose missions remain sealed in black folders because they're still too dangerous to declassify." He looked directly at Ortiz. "This man rescued more American soldiers than the combined efforts of everyone standing here." Not another word was said. The group moved out of sight. Inside the checkpoint, Jason turned to Brooks. "What just happened?" Brooks exhaled hard, rubbing his eyes. "We didn't just screw up, Rivera. We disrespected a living ghost out of legend." Ortiz leaned against the desk, face pale. "Cambodia," he muttered. "That mission was whispered like it wasn't even real. We just clowned a real-life Rambo." A few hours later, Jason's phone buzzed again. It was his uncle, Bob Taylor. "You do know who that was, right?" Bob asked, his tone sharp. Walter Kane wasn't just high-ranking. After Vietnam, he ran the most covert evac squad in U.S. history. They called it Shadow Echo. His name doesn't appear in records because they were never meant to exist. Jason's mind turned back to Kane's calm silence. The unanswered question returned to his lips. Then why would someone like that just let us turn him away? There was a long pause on the line. Because men like that don't chase recognition. They don't need to win arguments. They know who they are, and that's exactly what made them unstoppable. By early afternoon, whispers turned to orders. The base commander had been briefed. An emergency communication rolled across every department with one message: "Prepare full honors. Colonel Walter Kane is entering Camp Brighton." Within the hour, it looked like a change of command ceremony had broken out. Training exercises were halted. Uniforms were swapped for dress blues. Medals polished. Hats aligned. Soldiers lined the main road like a human corridor. Posture squared, hands behind backs, silence thick with anticipation. Inside the memorial courtyard, janitorial staff were polishing stone engravings that hadn't been touched in years. The names on that wall weren't just remembered by Walter Kane. They were carried by him. In front of the lineup, Lieutenant Brooks stood near the gate, his uniform tight, his pride bruised. He had been ordered to assist with the reception. Jason stood beside him, heart pounding. Up ahead, Kane walked with the same measured rhythm, his posture unbending, his face still unreadable. He wore no ribbons, no stars, just that same brown coat and a pair of khakis that told you all you needed to know. He had declined a formal uniform, but no one questioned it. Because when Walter Kane stepped through the gate a second time, the atmosphere itself shifted. Soldiers straightened without being told. Hats came off. No command was needed. The man they dismissed had returned. And this time, everyone stood. Every soldier lining the main road stood at full attention, saluting with a crispness usually reserved for four-star generals. Not one instruction had been given. Walter Kane simply commanded that kind of presence. He returned each salute slowly, his hand rising with the kind of practiced motion only decades of service could shape. His fingers, worn with age but steady with memory, moved with silent elegance. Across Camp Brighton, internal comms lit up with alert notices. Priority notification. Retired Colonel Walter E. Kane is on base. Proceed under honor protocol. Media access restricted. On veteran forums tied to the base, rumors turned to stunned confirmation. He's alive. Walter Kane? No way. I thought he passed in the early 2000s. My dad served under him. Always said he was the only officer who'd risk his life for a private. The message board filled fast. Aging vets began posting stories. One wrote, "I was in Nam, stuck on a ridge for 3 days. He was our evac lead. No food, no rest, no backup. He got us all out, didn't lose a single man." Another added, "He turned down a Silver Star in '76. Told the general the mission's success was thanks enough." Their voices all echoed the same truth. Kane didn't chase medals. He chased lives. Later that day, after a quiet decision from command, Lieutenant Brooks was temporarily pulled from checkpoint duty. His actions had embarrassed the base, but more than that, they had humbled him. He found Kane later, standing alone in front of the memorial wall. The older man's gaze was locked on a specific section, the names of those lost in Southeast Asia. Brooks approached slowly, unsure of what to say, the shame burning into every step. "Colonel Kane," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you an apology. I treated you like a stranger when I should have treated you like a giant." Kane turned to face him. His eyes were calm, but unreadable. "You were doing your job," he said with quiet resolve. "No, sir," Brooks replied, standing straighter now. "I followed protocol, but I ignored what mattered. I forgot what real service means." Kane looked at him for a long time, then said, "It's not just your fault, Lieutenant. It's the lens we're trained to look through now. People don't see past the surface anymore." Brooks blinked, uncertain. Kane continued, voice deepened by time. "We were taught to look for honor in action, not in appearance. Somewhere along the way that got lost." Brooks swallowed hard. It landed deeper than any reprimand ever had. That afternoon, the base commander, a 2-star general who had flown in the moment he heard, assembled everyone in the main auditorium. The room filled with more than 200 new recruits. Seasoned officers stood silently along the walls, their presence alone showing who Kane really was. When the general introduced him, the words were simple. "Today we receive a rare honor. Colonel Walter Kane, whose service remains partly classified, has agreed to speak." Kane stepped up slowly. His frame, though aged, carried weight. No ribbons, no uniform, just the man. "I didn't come here for a ceremony," he began, his voice low but clear. "I came to remember those who never came back." He paused. "You want to know what honor looks like?" he said. "It's not medals or badges. It's what you do when no one else is watching. It's the weight you carry for promises made." The room went still. Kane's eyes found Lieutenant Brooks near the back. "I don't blame the officer at the gate. He saw what the world taught him to see. But we have to be better than that." Afterward, as Kane made his way through the crowd, Sergeant Ortiz approached with emotion thick in his throat. "Sir, my father was at Camp Bay. Said a Colonel Kane saved him." "What's his name?" Kane asked. "Carlos Lopez, sir." 5th Infantry. Kane paused, then smiled gently. "I remember. He carried 2 men to the chopper, took a bullet, and kept moving. He was one of the good ones." Ortiz's eyes filled. Kane simply nodded. "You've got his steadiness." "He never told me that," Ortiz whispered. Kane gave a faint shrug. "The boldest ones rarely do," he said with quiet pride. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. After a brief meeting with the base commander, Lieutenant Brooks authorized a permanent change. At the very gate where Walter Kane had once been denied entry, a small bronze plaque was installed. It bore a simple but powerful inscription, "Kane Gate, in honor of silent courage." As Kane prepared to leave Camp Brighton, a civilian in a plain suit approached discreetly. His shoes were polished, his voice low. "Colonel," he said carefully, "you need to know something." Kane turned, curious. "The letters you wrote all those years? To the families of your men?" Kane nodded. "Yes. I never mailed them." "You didn't have to," the man replied. "You wrote names. You wrote addresses. Each time your Veterans Day beacon went live, we found them. And we delivered them." Kane stared at him, stunned. "All of them?" "Every one," the man confirmed. "The Sullivan family in Oregon, the Williamses in Georgia. They kept every word. Some framed them. Some read them every year." Kane said nothing. For the first time that day, his jaw tightened. Not from discipline, but from emotion. He turned away slowly, walked back to the wall of names, and placed his hand over the carved stone. No words spoken, just skin against memory. Behind him, a handful of officers stood at a respectful distance, hats in hand. When he finally turned to leave, Kane paused beside the commander and quietly offered a phrase that would later be etched beneath the gate plaque. "I only came to see the ones I couldn't bring home." As the sun dipped low, A black SUV pulled up to the gate. Kane, now walking alone, climbed in. Lieutenant Brooks stood at full attention as the vehicle passed. Through the tinted glass, Kane returned his salute. Firm, silent, dignified. In that wordless exchange, more passed between them than orders ever could. A mutual understanding of what it means to serve, and to be seen. Honor, once earned, never truly leaves you. In the months that followed, Walter Kane returned to his quiet home outside a Nevada desert town. He refused awards, turned down interviews, gently declined documentaries. But his story? It had already moved. Within military academies, his experience became known quietly as the Pentagon call. Not by name, but by principle. Cadets studied it not as an event, but as a mirror. The difference between following rules and understanding purpose. Lieutenant Brooks, now promoted, ensured the lesson was carried forward. He had the Kane Gate plaque polished weekly. No ceremony, just care. Its new inscription read, "Honor lives long after credentials expire." The same ID that had sparked the mistake, cracked, curled, and discolored, was placed behind protective glass in the Camp Brighton Historical Archive. The plaque beside it didn't list operations or awards. It said, "This card belonged to a man whose value outlasted its ink. Let no one be dismissed by age or judged by paper." A year later, on Veterans Day, another black SUV pulled up to Kane's home. This time, he was waiting on the porch with coffee and a folded letter in hand. It had become tradition, a quiet, faithful nod from the family he once led, still saluting the man who never asked for anything. Jason Rivera, the young private who started it all, was now a commissioned officer. He had earned a Pentagon endorsement to attend OCS, and at his graduation, his final words said everything. Don't measure a warrior by a card. Measure him by what he carries when no one's looking. Years later, Captain Brooks, now older, was asked what he remembered most from that day. He didn't speak right away. Finally, he said, "Some men don't need to wear a uniform. You feel it in the room when they enter." As for Walter Kane, his final letter was found after his passing at age 89, neatly placed on his desk. It read, "Honor doesn't fade. It waits for someone to remember." And in every base that ever lined a road with respect, someone always did.